Hello everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Adrian Lloyd, and this is just my stupid opinion. So today we got a couple different stories coming at you. We're going to be looking at a couple different clips from Question Period that happened in the House of Commons over this past week. We're going to be talking more about Bill Morneau and Justin Trudeau's tax changes due to passive income. We're also going to be talking more about the debt because it's worse than you think. And then we're going to go back an episode or two because we were talking a little bit about the ISIS fighters that are trying to be rehabilitated back in Canada. There's been more controversy around that. There's been more people speaking out about that. So we're going to be covering more of that story as well. So we're starting off today with a little bit of update about the Laurier College incident. And so as everybody knows, we had a problem where a teacher's assistant was reprimanded because she showed a clip of Jordan Peterson. It caused huge outrage. People rallied behind her. People were against her. There was a standoff at Wilfrid Laurier College that looked like it was going to be some sort of Canadian version of Charlottesville that turned into nothing. And this even reached up to the federal level because Andrew Scheer brought this up in Question Period time. During this question period, Justin Trudeau was not actually in Ottawa, so he wasn't present for it. So the rest of his cabinet are the ones dealing with the questions. This question went out to the Minister of Science. What Andrew Scheer asked was, would the Liberals stand with Lindsay Shepherd? In response to this, the Minister of Science ended up saying this.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister join me in condemning the egregious crackdown on free speech at Laurier University?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister of Science.
Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to creating open spaces for Canadians to debate and express their views. In a free society, we may disagree with the person's views, but we must defend their right to hold them, unless those views promote hate. Intolerance and hate have no place in Canadian society or in our post-secondary institutions. We will continue to fight to ensure the charter rights of Canadians are upheld and that every Canadian can feel safe and secure in their community.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, I don't know why the Prime Minister can't just simply denounce what happened at the university.
Now, I want to point out, too, that something probably is pretty significant about this is before I actually saw this clip from Question Period, I ended up reading it in the news. They were talking about how Andrew Scheer had questioned the Liberals over this. They only gave the first part of that quote. When she says the part about how, the Liberals, Conservatives, they may disagree, but it's important to stand together and support free speech, they only gave the first part of that quote, and they completely left off the rest of it where she says, but if it's hate speech and blah, 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 blah. So I thought that was pretty important to bring up, considering how the media seemed to be covering for the Liberal Party. It's disappointing to see this, that they're willing to cover something like this, because this is a significant change to the quote. You have to put the rest of it, or it doesn't have the context. If you just put the first part in, well, it sounds like they're agreeing, which is initially what I thought when I read the article, to the point where I actually put out a tweet that said that the one time we can get an actual answer from the Liberals is the one time Justin Trudeau isn't in town. Coincidence? But then afterwards, there were a couple of people who actually tweeted out the question period itself. And we saw the actual quote where she goes on to talk about hate speech. Because of this, I took down the tweet that I put up, even though it didn't have any likes, retweets, or any of that. So it's not like anybody really saw it. It wasn't really that important. But I couldn't believe that because that was a huge, huge change from between the two quotes. This is one of the big problems people are having with the media these days, is that they're not putting in full quotes, they're taking people out of context, and sometimes they're taking the context out to make things look better. Like in this situation, if you put the whole quote in, suddenly it doesn't look that good anymore. When they also bring up the part about hate speech, it's almost like the Minister of Science is equivocating this to what Lindsay Shepherd was doing at Laurier University. That is, if her showing this video really was hate speech, even though she's just trying to give two sides of the argument. Two sides of a good debate, because she did show Jordan Peterson, she did show Nicholas Matt, who was the one arguing for gender pronouns. So that's just a quick update to that, because once I saw what the Liberals said in comparison to what they were quoted saying, it's a big difference between the two. So I wanted to make sure that I brought that up. So now we move on to one of our main stories that we're talking about, and this article comes out of the Financial Post. And what it's talking about are the revised passive investment tax changes that are being introduced by Bill Morneau. According to the Parliamentary Budget Office, this could net the government $6 billion over the next decade. $1 billion would be netted in the first year, and then the rest of the $6 billion would be netted over the course of a decade. Before we actually get into our Financial Post one, there's just a quick summary of everything that's going on by Ottawa Citizen. It's a very short article, and it just says changes to passive income rule could net feds $6 billion, Public Budget Office says. And in this article is actually just a reprint of something from the Canadian Press. But it says, Ottawa, parliamentary spending watchdogs say Liberal changes to passive investment rules for small businesses could rake in up to $6 billion annually in a new tax revenue after a decade. The Parliamentary Budget Office report out today says that the new tax revenue would likely start out at up to $1 billion in the first year that the new rule comes into effect and continue to rise. The report says about 47,000 or 2.5% of Canadian-controlled private corporations would be affected by the changes the government is proposing. Finance Minister Bill Morneau said last month that Liberals would establish a threshold of $50,000 on passive income per year, which would equivalent to $1 million in savings based on a nominal 5% rate of return. The PBO says in its report that it can't be certain about its estimates without more details from the federal government. The report warns that the figures don't account for any changes small businesses owners take to avoid paying more taxes, which could decrease revenue estimates by as much as 15%. And now the Financial Post article, it talks about the same details, it just elaborates a little bit more. It says, on Thursday, the Parliamentary Budget Office released a study that found just 2.5% of Canadian-controlled private corporations, or roughly 47,000 companies, held passive investment income above Ottawa's $50,000 threshold in 2014. That figure compares roughly to 14% of Canadian-controlled private corporations, or 262,000 companies that would have been impacted before the threshold was introduced. The report comes after Finance Minister Bill Morneau's tax change proposed early this fall spurred an upheaval from small business owners and professionals who said the tweaks would needlessly restrict company cash flows. Doctors, lawyers, and farmers were among the loudest opponents of the proposal. In response, Morneau amended his earlier proposal in mid-October to only apply to CCPCs with investments income higher than $50,000. Passive income within CCPCs are currently taxed around 50%, including federal and provincial rates. Under the change, passive income above the $50,000 threshold earned on active retained earnings will be exposed to higher rate proposed by Ottawa, as much as 73% in some cases, according to estimates. Now, the Liberals were running on a campaign of, the wealthy have to pay their fair share. They need to pay back because they have more money. I don't know if it was just me. When I had this picture in my head of the wealthy people, I was thinking the multi-millionaires, the billionaires, the people who own multiple corporations. This is who I'm thinking he was talking about. I mean, what he wanted to do was didn't sit well with me, so I didn't end up going with him. But this is what it seemed to me when he was proposing all this, that these rich corporate fat cats that own chains upon chains of companies and rake in millions upon billions of dollars every year are the ones that we're going after. But as we look at this, we're seeing that it's actually not, because if we even look at something like doctors, lawyers, they make more money than the rest of us, but you wouldn't really put them up in the 1%. Most of them would be in the upper middle class, I would say. They're not breaking the point where they're stupid rich, But now this proposal wants to tax them upwards of 50% of what they make. Is that not a little ridiculous? But this is what a lot of people want to do. They want their kids to follow in the family business. Some do, some don't. But if they choose to follow in the family business, especially if your family business is being successful, why not? But now we're going to target these small-time people who maybe just have a clinic of their own or their own little office. And these are the people that we're going to target and hit the hardest for this. It reminds me of something George Carlin said in one of his stand-up. He says, the rich people make all the money, pay none of the taxes. The middle class do all the work, pay all the taxes. The poor are there just to scare the shit out of the middle class. And that's what it seems to me, because none of these people that they've named are the type of people that I would assume they would go after. And tax rates of this high are very illiberal. A true liberal philosophy calls for taxes that are necessary to maintain our standard of living, but is not supposed to call for more than that. When you want to tax people at 50%, you're being greedy as shit. You're just being greedy at this point. And in some cases, as it says, upwards to almost 75% of what they make. Why are people going to work if this is how much they're getting taxed? It's the old saying from, I think it was the Soviet Russia, where they said, they'll keep pretending to pay us and we'll keep pretending to work. That's essentially what this is going to come down to. This sort of taxation is ridiculous. This is where taxation is theft. I mean, if you want to tax someone at like 5% to make sure that everything can keep running or something like that, just as an example, that's one thing. I don't really consider that theft. But if you want to get your hands on the majority or at least half of somebody's income, now you're really crossing the line. I mean, I was pissed off when I would see my paychecks, and I'd make maybe $1,200. But after, $300 or so of taxes were taken off, I'm left with under $1,000. It used to aggravate me so much. But now let's say you make $100,000 and the government wants to tax you at 50%. That's just getting ridiculous. Now, my examples here just have to do with taxation in general. It doesn't exactly have to do with the passive income. But we've talked about the passive income in the past, where passive income was used by families in order to, it is a way to keep money in the family. But that doesn't seem unfair to me. If that's the money you make and you want to spread it any way you want, that's your decision. That is your decision. But now the government says that's unfair. Oh no. How dare you do something like that? But fathers and sons go into business together, siblings go into business together, families go in all together in business, so this will affect them the most. These really, the true family businesses, the true core of what's always been sort of, I guess you could call it the American dream, but I would just say the North American dream, about owning your own business, making your own money, being the master of your own domain. Having enough money to pay off your bills and live comfortably and have some extra spending cash. This is what from the more of the people that I've spoken to, the most of the people I've spoken to, this is what they want. They don't want billions upon billions of dollars washed all over them. They want enough to take care of their family and have a good life. That's all I want. If I have a little extra, fantastic. But maybe, just maybe, this doesn't have so much to do with actually that these middle-class families, these middle-class businesses are actually using a tax loophole that's so unfair to the rest of us, because personally I don't think it's that unfair for them. I know I only speak for myself, but hey, just my stupid opinion. So the government did a very classic tactic, though, of saying we're going to tax the rich percent and make sure that they pay their fair share, and then just really they ended up going after the common people, the people who have worked their way up in life. But maybe this doesn't have to do with that. Maybe it has to do because of our terrible fucking debt. Earlier I did a episode maybe about a month ago, called Trudeau's Debt Red Alert. And that was because I was showing how bad our debt had gotten under Trudeau. Well, as another example of how bad it truly is, this article out of the Globe and Mail says federal deficit at $5.9 billion for the first half of fiscal year. As this article goes on to say, the size of the federal deficit was $5.9 billion at the halfway point of the fiscal year, representing an improvement over the same period a year before. Yeah, not much of an improvement, I would say. The result of Finance Canada's monthly fiscal monitor report also suggested that the government is on pace to beat its 2017-2018 deficit target of $19.9 billion. Friday report shows Ottawa ran a $3.2 billion deficit in September, which is up from a $2.4 billion deficit in September 2016. During the 6-month period from April to September, the $5.9 billion deficit represented an improvement over the $7.8 billion deficit recorded during the same 6-month period the year before. Finance Minister Bill Morneau's October fiscal update did not announce a timeline for erasing the deficit. Instead, it outlined a scenario in which the size of deficit would decrease gradually, reaching $12.5 billion in 2022-23. I do not believe that this target can actually be reached, because even if we're seeing a little bit of improvement over this time last year, these are not good numbers. These would be maybe a slight improvement, but not a significant one. We need to stagnate the debt. We need to get it to stop dropping, because we're saying, oh, you know what? It didn't drop by as many billions of dollars last year, so, we're good. No, we're not good. We're in trouble. We're in a big trouble. The reason, though, that we're starting to see this, we didn't get in as much debt over this fiscal year, the first half of the fiscal year, compared to last year's fiscal year, that's because we have had an economic growth. So there is more money getting put back in. The problem I see is that we can't keep investing in this growth if we're just putting ourselves more and more into debt, because the problem is going to be the more and more you invest into these businesses, essentially the better they're going to have to do, the more you're still going to have to produce. It seems to me like it's going to be a never-ending cycle, that we're already in a bad shape, so we're going to pour money and get more in debt in order to try and get our economy stimulated. However, the more in debt we go, the better our economy has to do in order to catch up for it. So we're never going to be able to reach this target, in my opinion. I feel like we're almost running on a treadmill in this point. We're tiring ourselves out without reaching any destination. So in my opinion, what we should be doing is not trying to invest so much in economic growth, because Trudeau was saying he wanted to invest in, tech and infrastructure, which I actually think those are good areas to invest in, don't get me wrong. But we need to start getting a handle on this debt, and we need to at least get it to a place where we're not going so much in debt every year, and then we can start investing more money back into our tech areas, our infrastructure, and anywhere else where we can grow as a country. I've mentioned before in the past that I don't have the best economic mind. I'm trying to learn through as I go along in the podcast. But it's just, as I look at this, it just seems to me like this is a goal we can't reach, that we've already reached a point where we're too much in debt, we're too far behind, that we can't start pouring all this money in to try and boost our economy, and hey, we'll be out in whatever, 6 years, 5 years, we'll be okay. In the past, the Liberals have been proven to be dreamers, essentially. They have these big goals that they want to reach, but they don't have a realistic means to get there. And this is another one of those situations, because I have Bill Morneau telling me, oh, we'll be fine, we'll start getting a handle on this, and then he said by 2022-23 will be reached a $12.5 billion deficit. Yeah, well, aside for Bill Morneau telling me that, I have not heard good things coming out of whether it be something like economic newspapers or whenever I hear economists speak. I never hear good things about the Liberal budget. I never hear it leading us in a good direction. So I am very skeptical to believe Bill Morneau when he tells me that, oh, you know what, we do this and then we'll be fine by 2022-23, we'll have a handle on our debt and we can start getting out of it. No. And it seems to me that the rising taxes and things like passive income is just another way for them to try and scramble and scrape up every single penny they can in order to make up for the amount of spending that they're doing. This Liberal government really has been a government of spend, spend, spend. That's all they've been doing, with very little savings. And in my opinion, very little to show for it. Sure, we have some economic growth, but you're killing us in a completely different way. In fact, you're hurting us, the individuals, because from another article out of Financial Post, Canada's economic growth has come at a price. Its debt level is now the highest in the developed world, Economic growth has coincided with Canadians and their various levels of government taking on substantial wealth. Sorry, substantial debt. I don't know why I said substantial wealth. Substantial debt. Canadians have managed to become global leaders in indebtedness. According to the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, a preview from the Paris-based OECD Economic Outlook was released Thursday, warning of the amount of debt the families and businesses worldwide have been saddled with. Canada stands out in the report, which notes that the country's debt has continued to rise from high levels. Canada's credit to household for the fourth quarter in 2016 was ahead of all other major economies, including China and the United States, standing at 101% of our gross domestic product. When they say the Canada's credit to household for the fourth quarter 2016, they're talking about the debt, credit card debt, and various other debts. It was 101% of our GDP. Holy shit. We can't just take all our money and everything we make and we sell and we trade over a year and just put it towards the debt to pay it off and lower this. We can't just do that. We have so much that we need to invest in as a country. There's so many little things that you need to pay for. There's these disasters you don't even know are coming. I mean, fuck, Quebec got flooded this summer, and that cleanup was like $1 billion, I think. I cannot remember what I heard exactly, but it was something around there. I think at least $1 billion for the cleanup of Quebec after those terrible storms. What are the people supposed to do when we've been saddled with this debt? What are we supposed to do when our government isn't doing anything about it? When all they're doing is taking on more debt, and they're putting not themselves but the rest of us into the poorhouse. You know, we've been worrying about the debt for a long time now. I mean, countries are always worried about their deficits, but now we're getting to a level where we're going to reach America status. Right now we're past America status, but if we keep doing this, we're going to put ourselves in the same shithole as America, who's in, what, $17 trillion in debt or something like that? Maybe more. I can't remember what the number is right now. It just, as I've started podcasting and, focusing on things like government and budgets, I've started looking at more graphs and stuff, and I'm just watching as our debt continues to grow. We continue to make less. Sure, there's economic growth, but that can't last. Economic growth will eventually start to rescind. It's sort of, if you think about it, like a balloon. It's going to grow, it'll retract. It'll grow, it'll retract. So we can't rely on economic growth in order to make us money. We need to actually start handling how much we're spending. So this credit to household debt, that 101% of our GDP, this may not bode well for Canada and other countries carrying high levels of debt, the report suggests. Indebtedness of households and non-financial corporations in many advanced and emerging market economies is high. In many countries, it is continuing to rise, the report says. Highly indebted countries may be vulnerable to financial and real shocks, and such indebtedness may undermine the sustainability of growth in the medium term. So not even the long term, the medium term is when we can expect our economy to drop. I don't know really, when we're looking at this financially, what they mean when they say the medium term. Short term, I figure, is probably a year or two. Medium term, probably about 4 to 6, and then long term would be at least a decade or more, I guess. So it seems to me that maybe this is just a plan to hold the line by the Liberals. If they can make it look like everything's going while they're in office, that's great, and then they can get out of office and then not have to deal with it. Again, completely my opinion and what I think might be the situation. I have nothing else backing that up, but they don't really seem to take a real concern over this, and they have no problem throwing millions of dollars, not necessarily away, but to areas where we can't really afford it right now. Justin Trudeau, our Canadian government, gave like $20 million to the Hillary Clinton, not like the Clinton Foundation, but for some project she was doing. I think it had to do with support of women or little girls or something. It's like, sure, yeah, but we have things we need to focus on. And it's Hillary goddamn Clinton. You think she's not going to get the money for the project she wants to do? She's getting the money she wants. Canada doesn't have to donate. This is payment. To me, it seems like this was payment. Your essentially just your donations you make that are really going in the pockets where how much work do you really think Hillary Clinton's going to be doing at this foundation? Personally, since I heard about this, I haven't heard anything about it from her or anybody else. So I wouldn't be surprised if that money went bye-bye. But this is just an example of the things that we're investing in that we can't afford right now. We've really got to look at this rationally. We're in trouble. Canada is in a lot of trouble, and we've got to get a handle on this. Trudeau's plan isn't working. He wanted to go in debt in order to stimulate the economy, invest in infrastructure, so that way we can have a balanced budget by 2019. It doesn't look like we're going to have a balanced budget by 2019. Or 2020? One of those two. But anyway, we're not going to have a balanced budget by then. His budgets are bullshit. But then meanwhile, we have someone like the Liberal government of Ontario who just pushed out a $15 minimum wage that's going to start in little over a month. January 1st, 2018 is going to be the first day where people are offered $15 minimum wage. This is a gigantic increase from what it was before. I'm actually nervous about when I end school and get back out in the job market because I'm worried how many jobs are going to be gone over this. While there are people that could benefit from larger incomes, we can't just be throwing money for them. It's funny, actually, because a professor I spoke to at the college, my college, about the strike after everything went down, they were very realistic about the situation, no bullshit, just said it as it is. So I thanked them for it, and I said, thank you for, not BSing us, not bullshitting us. The rest of my teachers had, it's like, let's just move on, it's like an earthquake, let's just forget about it, which has been the attitude of just about every single teacher that I've met since I came back from the strike. Them, they were just straight up. And they actually, after I said, thank you for not bullshitting me, they just said, I've been a union person, my father was in the union, I'm in the union, and I've always supported the union. The union has done great things. Like he actually said, breaks are one thing that the union got for us. However, you cannot just expect, whether that be monetary increase or standard increase, without offering more work, better quality work. And they were so true. Absolutely true. This is one of the problems that we're having with $15 minimum wage, is they're saying, well, we're going to raise it up here so that way everybody has a livable wage. Livable wage should not be offered by the government for the sole fact that it might be a livable wage for a couple months, but what are grocery prices going to be like? Yeah. When I already groceries now, I go to the store, sometimes I see milk as high as like almost $6 sometimes, depending on when I'm there. I see a pack of bagels where they want $4 for them, and a loaf of bread they want $3.50. These are ridiculous prices. And are we expecting this to get better when suddenly minimum wage jobs are offered $15 an hour? I always wondered one thing. I remember I heard someone speak one time where they said that actually the minimum wage hurts people because it hurts people getting jobs, because apparently if you don't have a minimum wage, an employer would be more willing to take on a risk with you because they wouldn't have to pay you as much or offer you as much benefits. So that way they could pay you a little bit less to get you started, see how you work out, and then offer you more. I think this too is a little bit of a dreamer perspective, because without the laws in place, we've seen how businesses have abused their workers, how they'll take advantage of their workers, even with laws in place. I just finished working for a place, Thermo Fisher, which I really question their ethics and morals there. Wow. It's near the end, I was definitely calling them out for it at the job, but I really questioned their ethics and morals. They did not give a shit how long they kept us, how many days they kept us late, things like that. Plenty of other issues, but even with laws in place, we see plenty of problems already. So I don't believe this whole thing, what this guy said. I can't. Dinesh D'Souza, that's who it was. Yeah, he popped up on my YouTube feed one time, and I watched a video by him. I kind of rolled my eyes and went on to somebody else. He's not somebody Dinesh D'Souza, I don't know. There's something I just don't like about the guy. I have certain conservatives and liberals that I go to get for opinion news or just regular news or podcasts or whatever, and he's not one of those guys I would go to. But yeah, he ended up bringing this up. I thought it was a dreamer perspective, and I think a minimum wage is necessary because otherwise we will have abuse of the system. But when you just keep raising minimum wage repeatedly, that's all you're doing. You're not solving the situation. You're actually making it worse, because as we raise minimum wage, then everywhere else is going to start charging more. I saw it at work. Every single time we got a raise at Tim Hortons, prices went up. Every single time. Within a month or two, prices went up. And this is what's going to happen all around. A grocery store, for example. Those are minimum wage employees. Are we expecting this minimum wage business to keep its prices the same when it has to pay its employees, each employee, a couple bucks more? Absolutely not. This is going to have detrimental effects on us. And it just goes to affect our debt even more, because we're going to get more in debt, we're going to have less people working, you're going to have greater poverty. In an effort to actually help people out and create less poverty, they're going to create more poverty. Because employers won't be able to afford as many employees working for them if they have to pay them more. There is a limit. They have only a certain amount of money, and they can only dedicate so much money to the employees, even though it has to be a huge chunk. That is one of the biggest expenditures for a business, is paying your employees. So you still only have a certain amount of money there that you can siphon off for your employees. So you don't end up hiring more. You usually tend to cut positions when people leave, so you have less employees, and you spread the work among fewer people. I know, because I've been there in my jobs before. It's just when I see the liberal governments doing things like this, it really seems to me like they don't care about the debt. They don't care at all. And I don't know how they can't, because they're leading us down a path that's going to destroy us. Not literally, but economically it will destroy us. I have no doubt about that. Alright, let's move on now to our next story. So, a little while ago, maybe a week or two ago, we were talking about how the liberal government wanted to they wanted to rehabilitate ISIS fighters. See, now that the war is winding down with ISIS, which actually seems to be true, because I was skeptical on that episode about whether it was just media propaganda, because I've heard a couple times, we got ISIS on the back foot. It's like, shit, ISIS renewed their fight. But now it actually seems to be. Apparently, I think it was the Iraqis claimed victory over ISIS. So ISIS is still causing shit, of course. I'm sure everybody's heard about the mosque attack that took place in Egypt by now. Now that we got ISIS on the back foot, the foreign fighters, the citizen fighters of other nations who went out to fight, they need somewhere to go. In the last article, we were talking about how other nations were hunting down their own fighters and were eliminating them. England was doing it, the US was doing it, France was doing it, because they saw them as a threat, like a real threat. We need to do something about this. Which it was nice to see from England, because they had a fair amount of ISIS fighters that had gone over and come back and were living in the UK, so it's about time they started doing something about it. But the thing about this article was saying is that Canada was the only one that wasn't going to do this, because Canada, quote, did not engage in death squads, end quote, said Ralph Goodale. So instead, Canada wanted to rehabilitate them, re-educate them on how to act. And as I said during that episode, I said, I don't think this bullshit, weak argument is going to stand up to what they believe is their strong ideology. And I still don't to this day. But the reason we bring it up is because as this came out, people heard about it, people freaked out about it, and rightfully so. There's reason for people to be worried about that. These are people that went over, that claim that they hated us for everything that we are. Maybe not directly, but through the means and going over for ISIS, they were clearly saying that they were fighting against us because ISIS pretty much claimed that all the European world and the West is to be destroyed, essentially, or converted, or live under the jizya, which is a tax that non-Muslims can live under, but if you don't pay the tax, then you get eliminated. And the tax is only available for religious people. If you are a non-believer, such as myself, you just get eliminated. That's it. There's no mercy for the apostates and the non-believers. But anyway, everybody else, including myself, thought that this whole situation about trying to rehabilitate ISIS fighters was bullshit. And I actually would like to give a little bit of special thanks to one of the Conservative MPs, Michelle Rempel, because she's one of the MPs that I follow on Twitter. I follow all of them. I think the only party I don't follow is the Bloc Québécois, because I don't know, just don't. But, you know, I have Liberals, NDP, Conservative MPs that I follow. And so she was tweeting about this. People who should go, any Canadian should go check out her Twitter feed, even if you're not conservative. She actually is pretty funny and interesting to when she tweets out. But anyway, she was tweeting out a bunch of articles containing this about what was going on in the situation. So I ended up pulling a couple of these up as well. And our first one comes from CBC News. And it says, the federal government not tracking interventions with returning ISIS fighters. Public safety pays for interventions but doesn't know how many. Turning radicalized individuals away from extreme ideologies and helping them rejoin Canadian society is a key goal for the federal government, but it has little data on how well that fight is going. Of course it doesn't. We've never tried anything like this before, and there's a reason we haven't tried anything like this before. Because it doesn't work. We don't even have to look at this on this sort of scale. Think about how many people go to Alcoholics Anonymous and it doesn't work. Or anything else. Just rehab. You have to be in the mindset to recover in order for those to work. And if you're not in that mindset, and that comes from the person, the individuals, the individual has to be in the mindset that they want to change or they want to get better, that what they're doing is a problem. That's why they say the first step to recovering is admitting you have a problem. If these people are not admitting that what they have is a problem, then they're not going to take to any sort of rehabilitation. And that's one of the reasons we don't try this before. It won't work. But Justin Trudeau and the rest of his liberals, they don't live in the same world we do. They live on their mountaintop, their cloud, and they just thumb their nose down at the rest of us. That's one reason I really do not like the liberals, is because they're so unrealistic in this regard. They don't have any real connection to the people. All they've really won on was a philosophy and an ideology that a lot of people believed in. The new Canada Centre for Community Engagement and Prevention of Violence is supposed to be on the front line of the fight. It funds research and programs that aim to prevent and counter radicalization to violence at the individual level. But the government doesn't know how many radicalized people are actually being spoken to or who they are. Public Safety Canada says it can't provide statistics because the centre does not directly intervene with radicalized individuals. It doesn't directly intervene. Wow. This is an exact situation. You need direct intervention. These are dangerous individuals. So now the center that we're looking at doesn't even do its job properly. What are they doing if they're not directly interacting with these individuals? Are they sending around pamphlet, giving them, trash email scams and things like that? Spam mail, that's what I meant to say. Spam mail. Moreover, the group at the center funds tend to focus on research over action. Everything just right there from that article tells you that this is a proto-stage type of, psychology. This is not something that's been tried. It's not something that's been researched, but they're going to go ahead and try it anyway. No, absolutely not. This is bullshit. This is absolute horseshit. We don't even have statistics to back up whatever it is. We could have 10, we could have 1,000, we don't know. And part of the reason that we don't know is because, according to this article from the Toronto Sun, the Liberals' count of 60 Canadian jihadis is a 2-year-old number. A 2-year-old number. And I have a suspicion that 2-year-old number is not a Liberal number. That is probably a number that was being kept track of by Harper's Conservatives, because they were people that had a concern for ISIS. And then as soon as Trudeau came in, he pulled out of the fight of ISIS. And he kept on as a humanitarian position. Maybe as a little bit of a instructor position. I think we still have a few Canadian soldiers over there that are instructing the Iraqis and the Syrians, if I remember, unless they've been pulled. I know there were for a while. But we pulled our fighter jets from it. So we couldn't provide air support for the ground fighters. While, yes, there are problems when we're making strikes like this in a city, there's plenty of times where people get hit, we can't directly pull our fighter jets. We need to keep them in support because there's still other areas where they can be of assistance. What about a heavily ISIS-held area where it's full of ISIS warriors? There's a perfect opportunity. High casualty for the enemy and low chance of civilian casualty. But instead, we pulled right out. And this would have been at the height of when everything's going on. Because it was only this year, really, 2017, that ISIS really took a beatdown. And part of that is due to the fact that President Donald Trump was willing to act on that. Like him or not, whether you think he did the right thing or not. One of the reasons that ISIS nearly completely destroyed is because Trump let General Mattis fight ISIS. They had a much more direct conflict against ISIS, and ISIS is nearly destroyed. But in our case, we kind of let the fight go. Canada let the fight go. We lost track of everything. We ignored it. We forgot about it, which was the wrong thing to do, regardless of whether you thought that military intervention was the right thing to go. To forget about the situation was bullshit. We really did not do much to help as a country. After Trudeau came in, he pulled out the fighter jet. Sure, we kind of stayed on humanitarian purpose, but I don't think that you can count the large refugee immigration as really being that helpful, because again, Trudeau didn't take that much. When we had our influx of immigrants during the crisis in 2015, Trudeau took some on. He took 40,000, I think, on. At least at the time. I haven't checked the numbers in a while. But I remember he took on about 40,000, and then he ends up thumbing his nose at the rest of the world about how they need to do more to help Syrian refugees. Meanwhile, Europe's in a crisis mode because they've taken on so many not Syrian refugees, but immigrants. It was the immigration crisis. And because of it, we're seeing there's a lot of tensions there, racial tensions because of it. But I'd like to, before we continue on this article about the 60, the old number, the 60 number, I just want to continue with this article where we're talking about the de-radicalization programs. Because one part of the article we see here, it says, de-radicalization through poetry podcasts. Yeah. Poetry and podcasts. What the fuck are you going to do? Are you going to get them to listen to the Waking Up podcast with Sam Harris? Trying to go and de-radicalize them that way? Really? That's what you want to do? Yeah, right. Like they're going to have them listen to Sam Harris's podcast. And I really hope they don't, because the last thing I want are a bunch of crazy ISIS fighters coming back that want a fucking fatwa or something on top of Sam Harris's head. So... But anyway, it says, Gursky said he is troubled by the mixing of counterterrorism and de-radicalization with efforts to fight discrimination and hate speech. The vast majority of hateful people, and there are a lot of hateful people online and a lot of hateful people in Canada, are not terrorists. I think it's wrong to treat those things as the same even for research purposes. Vivek Venkatesh, Project Someone's director, told CBC News that his work does not relate to jihadi-inspired terrorism. Quote, what we are doing with the analysis that we've conducted is, in fact, build a series of podcasts and counter narratives through art-based pedagogy and poetry to empower the broadcaster population in understanding how ISIS is using and abusing religious interpretations. No. ISIS is using a very literal interpretation of the Bible, of the Quran and the Hadith. This is not them bullshitting. This is not ISIS, making up passages. They are taking real passages and applying it to an extreme. For instance, they in the past have killed their own fighters for smoking. Oh, that's not something that would get you killed in very many Muslim countries. Even in some places that can be as extreme as Iran and Saudi Arabia, I don't believe smoking it would be something that would get you executed. So without a doubt that ISIS has taken this to an extreme, and they're applying it to a very large extreme. For instance, there are articles that they put out in their Dabiq magazine about how to treat your sex slaves, things like that. They're taking very real passages because inside of the Quran, Muhammad had sex slaves. And in fact, one of the reasons that it seems like a lot of these sex slaves are young girls is the fact that Muhammad, his third wife, was it his third? Yeah, I believe it was his third wife. She was like 9 years old. They are not taking this out of context. But that part just bugs me. We need to be honest about that part. Now, again, most Muslims do not take the Quran quite to this extreme, I would say, where they're going to say that, where they're going to say kill for smoking, have a sex slave. Some do. But, a lot of the Muslims that I've run into in the Western world don't really believe that sort of shit. If they've been born here, raised here, they don't believe in that sort of shit. It's sort of like how Christians these days don't take the Bible to the literal extreme that they used to. That was where we had religious extremism. But at some point, they toned it down. And I think part of the reason is because of secularism. As secularism started destroying the narrative, they couldn't start taking it quite so literally, and that actually is what de-escalated Christianity, in my opinion. There could be more to it, but that's what I think. And for most Western Muslims, I would say that's the same sort of thing that they have. They don't have that quite literal view of like, oh, I can have a sex slave, or I can kill an apostate, or somebody who doesn't believe in my faith. Usually it seems that they either came from, if they are born here and that happens, they seem to come from a family that was already radicalized that came here, or they themselves came here and either got radicalized here or were already radicalized when they came here. But generally, it's not, there are times where they're citizens, but over in the Middle East is a different story. Over in the Middle East, they take that shit quite literally. Where are Muslim, and they even see Western Muslims as, if not apostates, just about, because they are, the shit that they'll engage in that Western sinful world. So I think that when these citizens went over, they could only have gotten more radicalized there. When they're exposed to it, and they're actually living the world, especially in an extremist place like the Middle East, and under an extremist regime like ISIS, these sort of things such as podcasts and poetry and music or whatever are not going to de-radicalize them. So the liberals don't really know what they're doing. Their plan is bogus. It involves more research than action. It's pretty much never been tried before. And on top of that, we have old numbers as to how many ISIS fighters have returned to Canada. So as we return this Toronto Sun article, it says this has been an issue for several years now. The return of Canadian ISIS fighters to home soil, and during that time, it's taken a lot of guesswork to piece together just how many jihadis we're talking about. It's a tough slog putting it all together, not just for journalists and parliamentarians, but also for CSIS and RCMP officers assigned to the task. How many ISIS fighters are walking around freely in our country? Dozens, potentially well over 100. We don't know the exact number, and we've got the evidence to wager it's more than the Liberals are letting on. I would have to agree with that. After 2 years of this, I don't see how it's not possible that we don't have more ISIS fighters living inside our country right now. And at least for most of these resettlements and areas where they tend to put the immigrants, it always seems to be it's always in the cities. So that also gives them access to a perfect target if these are radicalized ISIS fighters. Especially if we're moving to somewhere like Ottawa. Because just 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, we had a radicalized Muslim who tried to shoot up Parliament Hill. It was ridiculous. He killed, was it 1 or 2 people? He killed one person, and Corporal Nathan Cirillo, he ended up shooting dead at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and he made his way to Parliament Hill. A couple more people were injured in the attack before he was eventually taken out. But if you're bringing them into the city and they're radicalized ISIS fighter, you're giving them access to the capital. So now we have our second clip from question period. And this was when conservative leader Andrew Scheer was asking Trudeau about the program and the returning ISIS fighters. Watch as Trudeau must read from a script in order to answer Andrew Scheer.
Séance orale, oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, ISIS terrorists are criminals who fought against our country, but they are now being welcomed back to Canada by the Prime Minister with the promise of reintegration services to help them. Now, Canadians are shocked and alarmed that their government is not taking any steps to protect them. This is the #1 job of any government. So will the Prime Minister stand today and tell us exactly how many ISIS fighters have returned to Canada and how many of those are currently in jail or under government surveillance?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, one of the top priorities of any government is to ensure the safety and security of Canadians, and we ensure that every day. Our national security agencies are combating the phenomenon of Canadians participating in terrorist activities overseas. We use a number of tools to address the threat posed by these individuals, including the Passenger Protect program, cancelling, revoking or refusing passports, and laying criminal charges. Our national security agencies are carefully monitoring these individuals, and our law enforcement agencies do the difficult work of collecting evidence required for convictions in Canadian courts.
Chef de l'Opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Who got on a plane to fight for ISIS and watched as our allied soldiers were burned to death in a cage. Yes. These are people who got on a plane to go fight for an organization that sells women and girls into slavery. These are people who left Canada to go and fight for a group of people who push homosexuals off of buildings just for being gay. So can the Prime Minister explain to the House exactly what kind of a program, a reintegration service would look like for the people who commit these kinds of atrocities?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we take very seriously the protection of Canadians and will continue to. We also continue to carefully monitor trends in extremist travel, and in our national security agencies work together to ensure our response reflects the current threat environment. We recognize the return of even one individual may have serious national security implications. But we have launched the Canada Centre for Community Engagement and Prevention of Violence, which helps ensure resources are in place to facilitate disengagement from violent ideologies. In particular, children who return from conflict zones require tailored support.
The Honourable Leader of the
Trudeau doesn't even know enough about his own program that he can't do it. Like, he can't just stand up and answer the question. He needs a list in front of him of what they're doing. That doesn't inspire confidence. The Prime Minister doesn't even know what the program of rehabilitation, which is a very serious situation, is going to contain. And as we can see, it's all research and poetry and safe spaces and touchy-feeliness. That's what they're going to do to bring him back. They're going to give him cupcakes and pony rides and this, that, and the other. But on top of that, Trudeau decides that he's going to blame Harper, our previous Prime Minister, for this jihadi situation. According to this article, it says Trudeau's latest homegrown jihadi excuse, blame Harper. Everyone wants to know what on earth is going on with homegrown jihadis here in Canada, and so far we've got more questions than answers. This past week, the issues garnered renewed attention after multiple back and forth exchanges in the House of Commons over whether we should be treating our own jihadis, freshly returned from the battlefield, with kids' gloves via unproven reintegration programs, or try our hardest to charge and convict them of serious criminal code offenses. Amidst all this, a new talking point emerged from the Liberals. It's all Stephen Harper's fault. Last Wednesday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau visited a Toronto area mall and was surrounded mostly by adoring selfie seekers. Mostly, one woman was far from happy with Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale's statement in the House of Commons on Monday that there were about 60 returning jihadis roaming around Canada. In a video posted to social media, the woman shouted her concerns at Trudeau. The PM rather surprisingly turns away from his fans and, without breaking a smile or bordering on a wink, tells her they came under Harper. Is this true? Yes, when it comes to the 60 count. But as I wrote in a recent column, Goodale is, in his very statement, references CSIS testimony that he admitted was many months old, over 2 years old in fact. Goodale's office insisted the numbers remain the same, but a 2017 public threat report expected that the coming weeks will be the true test. That original 60 number comes from the December 2015 year-end number. While a handful of these 60 may have possibly come in after November 4th, when Trudeau became Prime Minister, most of them surely came in under Harper's watch. Expect the Liberals to highlight this point more and more, because only hours after Trudeau's mall appearance, Liberal MP Bill Blair made the same argument in the House of Commons. Conservative MP Michelle Rempel asked the government what they're planning to do with these dozens of returning jihadis. Blair responded, including Trudeau's line that they all came in before the Liberals took office, and, quote, not one of these individuals has been charged during the term of that government. In fact, the previous government cut over $1 billion from Canadian security services during its last term in office, end quote. We know that Canadian jihadis have indeed been coming since at least the middle of 2014, so the question as to why none of them were charged soon after is a good one. While the politicians don't direct the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, you'd still expect a government that talks tough on terror to oversee tough on terror results. The Conservatives were the government that in 2013, as Rempel reminded Blair, introduced the very legislation that now allows for charging Canadians who go abroad for terror purposes. The Liberal caucus voted for this law back then, so they would strive to make good use of it now, although new minted leader Trudeau was, in fact, absent for the vote that day. What Trudeau said here is only partially true. Sure, those numbers did come in under Harper, and yes, they were not charged under Harper, and they should have been. Without a doubt, Harper does own a little bit of blame for that. But Trudeau is the current sitting Prime Minister and has been for a couple of years now. By now, it is his responsibility to handle this. But instead, he's going to pass blame off to Harper just because of that. Well, it sucks, but sometimes you got to clean up their messes. And this is one mess that you got to clean up after Harper. And, funny, you can sit there and you can bitch and moan now, but this is a very small mess you would have to clean up after Harper. The next sitting Prime Minister, if Trudeau does not get back in office, is going to have a big debt saddled with them. They're going to have a big debt saddled with them when they take office because of Trudeau, and that's a mess they're going to have to clean up. Everybody is constantly cleaning up messes when they come in office. Obama had to clean up Bush's mess when he came into office, and then Trump had to clean up some of Obama's messes when he came into office. But being able to go after jihadis, if they had been paying attention to this, if they'd been keeping track, this would be a very easy problem solve. Get the security forces to work. Get the police forces to work and bring these people in and arrest them at the very least. But we're not even doing that. Instead, we're going to give them flowers and candy. But I want to thank you all for joining me on the podcast today. I'm Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion. And next time I film, I should have my clothes. There was a mix-up with UPS, so they couldn't get it in before the weekend. But hopefully next time I air, I will have my new JMSO podcast clothes. So looking forward to it. Thank you again. I'll see you soon.